Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holochek. It's a rainy Sunday afternoon in Lynchburg, Virginia. And so I thought I'd talk to you today about a certain argument from the world's foremost authority on the relationship between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, Annette Gordon-Reed, the Harvard professor. And the title of this talk will be None of This Follows, and the subtitle, Gordon Reed's ultra-crepidarian attempt to block the argument from character. So I, as usual, throw in a big word, ultra-crepidarian. It refers to someone, for example, speaking about something they ought not, about which they ought not to be speaking. She doesn't have expertise in a certain area. At least I'm going to make that case. So the idea is that to allow for the possibility of relationship for Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, we have to show that no argument from character can block this possibility, right? Otherwise, her argument doesn't go through. Anyways, okay, so Thomas Jefferson's granddaughter, Ellen, his favorite granddaughter, Ellen Wales Randolph, once said about the avowed relationship between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings in a letter to Joseph Coolidge. I ask, is it likely that so fond, so anxious a father would have selected the female attendant of his own pure children to become his paramour? The thing will not bear telling. There are things, after all, that as moral impossibilities. So the idea is, Gordon Reed and others have argued that Sally Hemings was Jefferson's attendant. Here we have clear evidence of the granddaughter saying this was the female attendant of his own pure children. She was Mary's attendant. All right. So in general, the argument can be broken down thus: Jefferson was of a character irreproachable. A person of irreproachable character would never have had a relationship with a female caretaker of his children. So Thomas Jefferson did not have an affair with Sally Hemings. That's the argument she's addressing. She wants to say, bunkum. All right. In her first book, I think it was 1997, Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings, she writes, and I read from her passage. She says, for some scholars, Jefferson's fastidiousness, difficult to plead, his attachment to reason and rationality, his zeal for exactitude, his obsession with orderliness, all signal that he was without a real capacity for romantic involvement or sexual passion. What one makes of the fact that an individual possesses some or all of these characteristics is a function of one's own values and experiences, and of course, one's personal view of what it takes to be sexual or romantic. People who are compulsive about making lists have no interest in sex or romance. People who hold their emotions severely in check have no interest in sex or romance. People who are extremely clean and have no interest in sex or romance. None of this follows, she says as a blanket. It's not even remotely a fact. I don't know what that means. So what is a remote fact? How is a fact can be remote? That a person who possesses all these traits, even in abundance, is without sexual passion, right? Or a romantic yearning. So we may express an argument from Gordon Reed. All persons who are rational, exact, and orderly are asexual. Jefferson was right, rational, exact, and orderly. So Jefferson was asexual. She wants to say this does not follow. Right? If we go back to that passage, it's certainly a rather extraordinary passage. What she's in effect trying to show is that in this, none of this follows, is that there are no correlations, right, between. I mean, it's certainly hard to understand exactly what she's arguing for here. I'll try to make sense of that. Now, it goes without saying that no one has really touched this argument. Until I'm addressing it right now. It's gone unchallenged, as if the argument is cogent, and I think it's uncogent. It's a fallacious argument, right? It's a non sequitur, right? Now, first off, if what she says is true, this bodes illy for the argument for the science of psychology, right? Then we merely throw away all of what psychologists have done and are doing, right? Because none of this follows. There are no correlations. We can't say that there are correlations between certain sort of behavioral exhibitions, right? Um, Everything is inescapably, ineluctably subjective, right? Why should we trust then the science of behavioral psychology? Why, if someone is an obsessive compulsive person, why would that person seek the succor of a clinician or a clinical psychotherapist, for example, right? Why not just go to a sympathetic bartender or to your barber? Um, you know, so, you know, there are correlations between behavioral traits, right? And this is one of the things that she just throws away. With her, we need to dismiss all that. We do know that, the sort of look at the behavioral traits. Let's go back to her argument that Thomas Jefferson, he was a rational person. He had a zeal for exactitude. He had an obsession with orderliness, right? Um, these things are correlated. I hate to say this, Gordon-Reed, but with asexuality. It's not to say Jefferson was necessarily asexual. Of course, he had a relationship with his wife and had several offspring, I think 5 children, 2 of which lived to adulthood. Um, but, I've argued in my book on Thomas Jefferson and psychology, that Thomas Jefferson was early on, he was a fairly robustly sexual person, an emotional person who learned to sublimate his emotions because when he displayed his emotions, everything turned out chaotically. So, uh, but the fact that later in life he exhibits these rather anal characteristics and he exhibits them in abundancy is strong argument for me of evidence of his sublimation, that he's sublimating here, right? The times that he spends in writing and reading and doing science and thinking about political theory, thinking about philology and farming and things like that. He was not the sort of person who would, in my estimation, be successful in an on the quiet liaison with someone like Sally Hemings, right? And those, the rationality and those sort of obsessive traits, of course, even if he were a person of hypersexuality, would make the choice of Sally Hemings a really, really significantly poor choice. You think he'd find someone who would be able to deal with his. So, but we get from her the notion that all of psychology is really subjective. Um, right now, one could be charitable with Gordon Reed and say, well, that's not what she's trying to. She's not trying to throw away all of human psychology. What she's trying to do is uh, is to argue for the rather mundane claim that there are no psychological generalizations, no psychological laws, and that's true, right? Psychology deals with correlations, with relationships, and there are no in talking about correlations between behavioral links between someone being obsessively rational and someone being, say, obsessively orderly. These events are correlated. Um, Rationality is itself a type of mental orderliness, so we would expect plainly that this would exhibit itself in sort of physical features of keeping an environment clean and so forth. I myself am sort of inordinately orderly when it comes to my own writings, when it comes to doing Thomas Jefferson, having material easily accessible. The idea is, the one professor of mine when I was an undergrad student had papers all over and books all over, and he had on his desk a messy desk or something like that, a sign of genius. And first impression I got, no, the messy desk is a sign of a messy mind. And I meant that sincerely because if things are scattered all over the place, you certainly can't find anything and can't get anything done. So I never bought into that. So, but I'm not inclined to take her argument charitably, and I mean that sincerely, simply because she's says what she says in very, very strong language that none of this follows. So there's no reason to say, because if we even took it charitably and said that there are no psychological generalizations, right, still that would bode poorly, that would bode illy for her argument, because, it would still follow with a high degree of probability that Thomas Jefferson was asexual. And certainly she doesn't want that. So the whole thing that none of this follows probably needs to be taken rather, if you want to call it uncharitably, but I think this is just the best way to take it, that there are no, there are no assessments that a psychologist makes that can be taken as reliable. It's all subjective, right? As she says in her, going back to her argument, right? It all depends upon one's own values and experiences, one's own personal view of what it takes to be sexual. So my view is one thing, your view is another, and then so we are living in a world of wild subjectivity where no psychological generalizations are possible. So, this is a rather tendentious view of Gordon-Reed, clearly, because tendentious, say, because she needs to address this and block this to allow for the possibility of relationship, because she's going to admit that even if we can state with a high degree of probability, there's Jefferson's little puss. We can say with a high degree of probability that there are correlations between certain behavioral traits, then she's on shaky ground and she doesn't want to do that. So that's why I call this the ultra crepidarian attempt, right? She knows better than the psychologists who study human behavior for a living. And in doing so, if we follow her sagacious advice, right? This is why she's at Harvard, for Pete's sake, and why she had won 18, right? A Pulitzer Prize and 17 other awards for her second book on the Hemings of Monticello, right? So we need not follow the advice of the psychologists or the people who study human behavior. Uh, Gordon-Reed, we just listen to her. And of course, whatever she says about Thomas Jefferson, we just need to believe it on her authority, right? Which is what, astonishingly, which was what scholars of the like of the kind of Gordon Wood does. He just says, well, she has shown with her people, great scholars talk. She's just shown rather convincingly with her very, very cogent. Go down, Jeff. With her cogent arguments that that Jefferson had a fair Sally Hemings. We need not investigate this. No, we do need to investigate that, right? Her arguments are rather pathetically bad. Once we look at them, I'm a trained philosopher and logician, and astonished that no one pays any attention to the lack of cogency in any of the arguments that she puts forth, right? But we are living in a different world, right? You cannot attack a person for lack of logicity in a paper or something, because that tends to be an ad hominem. I'm attacking the person. Well, sometimes people need to be attacked. Views have implications, and to state that Thomas Jefferson fathered all the kids on such flimsy arguments is that's unconscionable. That's disgusting, it seems to me. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please like it and share it with your friends. And I'll be doing more of these later on. So from Lynchburg, the rain has abated. It's still sprinkling a little. And enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Hopefully it's sunny where you're at and warm. Ta-ta for now.